on South Asia is brought to you by Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, together we'll go far.
Hello viewers, this is Anjali Sharma sitting here at the studio of Eye on South Asia. We have a guest, Rabbi Romeo Daniel, with us today, and he's going to talk about the Indian Jewish community in the US. He's the president of Indian Jewish Congregation of USA. He's recently ordained as a rabbi by American Board of Rabbis, and he's a cantor. Rabbi Romeo Daniel, can you please tell us about your family when you was living in India and your journey from India to the US?
We are originally from Bombay. Today it is called Mumbai. I left India in 1962 when I came over to the United States to do my master's in chemistry, but went back to India in 1964. And after that we moved to a place called Ahmedabad, which is a fairly large city, as you know. We were there for almost 25 years. There was just one synagogue in Ahmedabad, and I became the president of that synagogue right from 1986 to 1990. I was also conducting the services, religious services in that synagogue for a few years. In 1990, we left India. We went to Mauritius for 3 years, to Madagascar for 1 more year, and then in 1994, we came down to New York, where we started our own business. We've been there ever since. But since New York afforded a lot of opportunities to develop our own culture, our own traditions in terms of Jewishness, I felt it important to restart religious services and other programs for the Indian Jewish community. We have an Indian Jewish community here in the United States of about 350 individuals. There are about 100 to 120 living right here in the tri-state area, which is New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. So we restarted religious services here in New York in 1995, mainly services for the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Simchat Torah, and the other festivals like Hanukkah, which we are celebrating next week. We celebrated Passover, we celebrated Purim. So we wanted to give the Indian Jewish community here a tradition which we wanted to keep on maintaining. We didn't want to lose that. And the only reason we don't want to lose that tradition is that basically America, and New York in particular, is a very large Ashkenazi community, a Jewish community, whereas our traditions are a little different. As you know, you have the Ashkenazi, you have the Sephardic, you have the Mizrahi, you have also the Indian Jews. So we wanted to make sure that our Indian Jewish tradition and culture are not lost to the present Indian Jewish generation as well as the future generation. We wanted to maintain that culture. So we started having these services, having the programs, which are very much like what we used to have back home in Bombay and in Ahmedabad. This was the main reason. And the other reason was that we want our Indian Jews here in the United States to become part of the larger Jewish community, as I said, which is mainly Ashkenazi. There are a few Sephardic Jews. But though we might want to become an integral part of the Jewish community, we want to integrate but not assimilate and lose whatever we have been practicing for the last almost 250 years back home in India. It's a long, long time for any community to practice their traditions, and we didn't want to lose that. So that was the main reason why we started the Jewish practices, the Indian Jewish practices here in New York, and we still continue doing it. So we've been doing it now for almost 18 years.
How many Indian Jews have left in India at this present time?
Okay. You know, at its peak, India had almost 30,000 Indian Jews, which included 3 major communities. You had the Bnei Israel, which was the largest community. They had about 25,000 at the time. You had the Baghdadi Jews, which meant that they originally came in from the Middle East, Baghdad and Syria. Their population never exceeded 4,000 to 4,500. And then you had the Kochini Jews who came into the south of India, and they're called Kochini Jews because they settled in Cochin, but they first came to Krangdanur, which is a little away from Cochin. Their community never exceeded 2,000. Sometimes some people say 2,500. So these were the three major communities in India. The Kochini Jews came in around 175, 176 BCE, the same time as the Bene Israel, but they went further down south. The Bene Israel landed first just very close to Bombay on the Konkan coast. And then you had the Baghdadi Jews who came in much later. The first Baghdadi Jew apparently came in the year 1870. So these were the three big communities which contributed to the Jewish presence, mainly on the west coast of India, the southern part of India to some extent, and also the eastern coast of India, which meant Calcutta. So these were the three big communities. Two more communities have come up very recently. One was the Bene Menashe. Apparently one of their sages, one of their older wise men as they would call them, felt that in the year 1951, the people of Mizoram and Manipur in particular, who had not converted to Christianity, really belonged to one of the lost tribes, because a part of the literature indicated that they had similar literature as we would have in our Bible. In particular, we used to talk about the Song of Miriam, which was sung at the parting of the Red Sea. It's really called the Sea of Reeds. So that song and others indicated that they might have had some Jewish background way, way back. And they felt that they were now from the heritage of Menashe. Menashe was one of the sons of Joseph. Joseph was one of the sons of Jacob. Of course, we have the 12 tribes. So here you had Menashe, and they named themselves the Bene Menashe.
Can you also tell us about Indian Jews who immigrated to Israel and how they integrated in the Israeli society?
When the Indian Jews, especially the Bene Israel, started their migrations, as I said, in the mid-1950s, it wasn't an easy process. Making an aliyah to Israel was easy. Integrating into Israeli society was not easy. They had quite a few problems which they had to face in Israel, especially the fact that when they were given either housing or jobs, they would be given places which were not as well occupied. In other words, they would be sent to places like Beersheba or Lud or Dimona, which were still to be sort of modernized. After all, Israel itself was recovering from the wars which it had in 1947 and 48, and they had another war in 1956, which was making things difficult for many people, but more so for the immigrants who came in from India. They had to really fight their way through, because there was a certain amount of discrimination based on the fact that they were not from Europe. They were not from East Europe, because most of the people who had come to Israel initially were from East Europe. Migrations took place later on from the Middle East, because people had to leave from countries like Iraq and Iran and Syria. They started migrating to Israel. And at the same time, the Indian Jews were making their aliyah to Israel. They found it a little difficult. At one time, there was even a small question, oh, they need conversion. This was turned down by the Knesset because it was pretty ridiculous at the time to even suggest that. But in 1964, the Knesset did say that there's no question about the heritage of the Indian Jews. They are full-fledged Jews. And since then, life has become much easier for the Indian Jews in Israel. But the Indian Jews themselves had some sort of slight hesitation to bring out their Indianness. They had that slight complex that we may not be on par with the other Jews. We are a little less than them. No reason really for that, because our practices were probably at times more Jewish than the Jews themselves who were already settled there. But it does happen, it did happen when they went there, that they had a difficult time. Today, things are totally different. Today, to be an Indian Jew and be proud of your heritage has become a very important part of the second, the third, and the fourth generation, where they're proud to bring it out, because after all, Indian culture and Indian traditions is becoming accepted and wanted all over the world, including Israel. So now the Indian Jews, I think, have a far better time than what they had when they first went out there.
Are there many marriages outside the Jewish faith in India and also in the US in Indian Jewish community? Do you see often?
If we are talking about the past, it was uncommon. It was virtually unknown. Times, of course, have changed. That's one of the reasons why many of the Jews from India really have left the country, because as the community and the population started becoming smaller and smaller, having a marriage within the community was obviously becoming more difficult, where the community was settled around a synagogue. Today, places like Mumbai, Bombay, I still call it Bombay, has become much, much larger, with the result that a smaller community is now dispersed over a larger area. So the social interaction within the community is less. The social interaction with other communities is much more, with the result that interfaith marriages have increased in India. Fortunately, in Israel, it doesn't happen because most of the people there are Jewish, and that's one of the reasons why people have moved to Israel. But the Jews who have moved, say, to England, or they moved to Australia or to the United States, there, though the Jewish populations are pretty large, you do find mixed marriages taking place to a much larger extent than what would have been anticipated. You would think that in a place like New York, for example, where the Jewish community is very large, you would think that many of the Indian Jews would get married to other Jews. It doesn't necessarily happen that way, and you find a large number of mixed marriages taking place. But the only thing is that as long as they retain their faith and their practices, at times it has to be accepted, and it is.
Can you please talk about US, India, and Israel relations in present day?
Okay, I'm going to first just talk about the relations between India and Israel. As you know, since 1992, the relations between India and Israel have changed for the better. Before that, we did not even have a consulate in the country. We only had a vice consul. And India did not really recognize Israel. It was only in 1992 that India improved relations with Israel such that we could have an ambassador based in Delhi and a consul general based in Bombay, in Mumbai. So the thing is that this has led to such tremendous changes in not only the political relations between the two countries, but also in the business relations between the two countries, where our trade was hardly 300 million in around 1996. Today, the trade between India and Israel exceeds 5 billion. And the statistics indicate that in the next 4 years, which is not a large number of years, they expect the 5 billion to go up to 10 billion. And the interchange and the business relations are not only in defense equipment or arms or ammunition, that forms part of it, but you have an interchange of knowledge and education in terms of agriculture, in terms of biotechnology, in terms of nanotechnology. You increase the business in the diamonds, which is big business between Israel and India. So things have changed tremendously, and the relations, the trade relations between India and Israel are tremendous as of today. And I don't see it sliding back to the pre-1992 era. It's going to become bigger and bigger.
Do you see a solution to Middle East conflict, and how do you see India and US can resolve this issue?
The Middle East conflict is not an easy one to solve. As you know, this conflict has been going on for so many years. It's been going on for thousands of years. But of course, I'm just talking about the last 60 years. It has been an ongoing conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and of course the rest of the Arab countries surrounding Israel. I think India, with its good relations with Iran and with Syria and the other countries, could play a significant role in lessening the differences between the two countries. And the United States, of course, plays a very important role in this too, because of the role they already are playing in Egypt and in the other countries, including Libya. I think they could bring about at least a lessening of the escalation of violence which has taken place recently, and hopefully it doesn't continue. So these two countries certainly could bring about some approachment between the Israelis and the Palestinians on one side and Hamas on the other side. But it is still going to be a long, drawn-out process, because I think people have not yet come to the conclusion that they would like a peaceful settlement of the problems which they are facing as of today. So as long as they are not ready to reach a compromise, this is going to be a long process.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Romeo Daniel, for coming here and talking with us. Thank you so much, viewers, for tuning with us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you again very much for coming here.
Thank you, Anjali, for giving me this opportunity to present my views on the Indian Jews and letting the people know that we have a community which is vibrant.
Eye on South Asia is brought to you by Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, together we'll go far.